for me, there's only one way ever to approach art is with my full heart, and so I do that sometimes at some personal cost, but the personal benefit is always more than that.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Feeling Seen, the podcast that talks about the movies and characters that make us feel seen. And today is one of those extremely exciting days on the show where we have somebody who is a living encyclopedia of cinema, which just gives us so many incredible conversation tributaries to go down. You will know this person's writing from being a top film critic for Film Freak Central for literally decades now. You may be aware of his book, A Film by Walter Hill, which is exclusively available through the MZS Press, Matt Zoller Seitz Press, and another esteemed giant of the criticism world, a film writer, a film critic, a film analyst, an extemporizer, a teacher, a contributor to Pop Culture Happy Hour, where we have paired up many times. Walter Chaw, what else do the people need to know about you before we get started here? I feel like there's so much I could say, I just need to stop talking.
I don't know. I think I just could never live up to that introduction already, so probably leave it at that.
You're one of our great responders to film.
Well, I mean, I think if I have a superpower, that's it. I wish it was understanding physics or something that could make me a living salary.
Same.
But yeah, I understand. I like to respond to film, and I think that's the purpose of film. Really, is to provide sort of a catalyst or a prod to get to know ourselves and our world better, and especially ourselves in the world.
And that actually gets into something that I did want to bring up to sort of table set, which is that I feel like a signature of your criticism, your critique, your response in writing about cinema is an incredibly personal infusion into the way you read film and send it back out into the world in your replying to it. And I wanted to hear from you about when film started becoming something so personal to you that you needed to express yourself around it so fully.
Well, that's interesting you say that. I always look at it as sort of therapy, and I never really intended my writing or musings about film to be public. It just happened that way a little bit. But I was a freshman in college, and I was in the engineering track at CU Boulder. And it just wasn't for me. It was sort of what was slotted for me, because of my background and my heritage. Some people may have noted that I'm Chinese, and that's true. It's true. No matter how much I try to try to hide the fact of that. I used to joke that I didn't know I was Chinese until I went to college. But I went there for an engineering degree and really quickly discovered that just wasn't my dream or my passion. I didn't like it. I didn't really jibe with the people in the program either. So very early on as a freshman, I took this course, a film course, and just as an elective. And one of the movies that we watched was The Conversation, the Francis Ford Coppola film from 1974. And it really kind of opened my eyes to this idea that film was more than just what I had been using it for, which was mother, confessor, and sometimes lover, and all those things that a lone kid does with movies. But I hadn't thought of it as poetry before, and I hadn't thought of it as potentially great art. I looked at it as a product or as a commodity or a thing that would distract me or help me speak English or whatever. And when I watched The Conversation, I realized there's poetry in this. There's all seven arts are at work in this, and there's things to be pulled from it. The Conversation in movies like this, from the American 70s, really opened my eyes to this idea that you could tell all of these tales and tell all these stories and, doom, romantic love and paranoia. All of this stuff was possible through film, and film was indeed serious and an art that was worth preserving. And I think through that, I began to really deal with my upbringing, generational trauma, all those things that are easier to talk about now, then not so easy for me to talk about, and very private. And the idea of therapy was anathema to me and my culture. And so beginning to write about film was a means for me to be able to begin to express some of those hurts and some of those insecurities, and having a avatar like the Harry Call character from The Conversation, who is a total loner, a weirdo, sort of a tech guy, who overhears other people having a conversation and kind of misunderstands what he hears.
Jack Tar Hotel, 3:00, room 773.
I heard if you fill me in a little bit once in a while. Did you ever think of that?
It has nothing to do with me, and even less to do with you.
It's curiosity. Did you ever hear that? It's just goddamn human nature.
Listen, if there's one surefire rule that I have learned in this business is that I don't know anything about human nature. I don't know anything about curiosity. That's not part of what I do. This is my business.
You know, all of that touched on my neurodivergence, my insecurities, all that stuff. And I thought, what a miracle that Francis Coppola knew me so well somehow. As a lonely 18-year-old Chinese kid in Colorado, that he made a movie kind of about what I could turn out to be if I wasn't careful. So I think there's when I began this sort of just writing for myself. I'd fill up pages and pages of stuff about this movie that I saw and how it made me feel and why it made me feel that way. And I began to see patterns emerge. I don't want to make it seem more mystical than it was. It was really just a product of loneliness and neurodivergence, I think. But there it was for me. This was going to be the means that I attached all this stuff. And I went through poetry as well. And poetry criticism and critical analysis, all that stuff kind of gelled together into 40 years later, here we are. Yeah.
Well, in expressing such a connection to the conversation, the movie you haven't, in fact, brought to our prompt is a Coen Brothers film. It is Barton Fink, which is an earlier side film of theirs starring John Turturro about a New York City playwright obsessed with creating theater for the common man, who gets contracted to come out to Los Angeles to get paid a lot of money at that time, perhaps $2,000 a week, to write for a studio. And that is something that his agent seems to sell to him sort of under the auspices of like, if you take this money now, the amount of common man theater you could make after it would be boundless kind of thing. And he arrives out to Los Angeles and stays in a rather dingy hotel and starts experiencing a sort of destruction of himself, sort of mentally and emotionally, as he endures writer's block, unable to write a B picture about a wrestler for this studio.
Just having trouble getting started. It's funny, I'm blocked up. I just feel like I need some kind of indication of what's expected.
Wallace Beery, wrestling picture. What do you need, a roadmap? Look, you're confused. You need guidance? Talk to another writer.
Who?
Oh, Jesus. You throw a rock in here, you'll hit one. Do me a favor, Fink. Throw it hard.
So, where did you first connect with Barton Fink?
Well, it's really interesting, the creation of this film, because the Coen Brothers were experiencing writer's block themselves, I'm sure, as they're writing, trying to finish Miller's Crossing, which is one of the most beautiful, but I think complex plots of a mainstream film for ever, maybe. And so they had writer's block. So as a side project, essentially, they kind of banged out Barton Fink. And both of those films released in the same year. It was one of those remarkable moments in our history, like when Mel Brooks did Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles the same year. But yeah, so Barton Fink comes out. I think it won Cannes and everything, and I saw it as a fledgling film guy. The 91, I was like a senior in college or something. I was like a film bro essentially, and really loved Blood Simple. I really loved Raising Arizona. I could not wait for the next Coen Brothers joint. And here's this weird movie that was neither Raising Arizona nor Blood Simple. It was just sort of like it's a comedy, I guess, but there's some horror elements to it. And I really began to vibe with it because, you talk about, he really wants to be celebrated by the common man. He's this New York playwright, all the hoi polloi, and then intellectuals love him and everything. And he wants to be like a common writer for the common person. And for me, I always took that as sort of a shorthand for normalcy, for he wanted to be accepted as normal among people that he perceived to be normal. And I think normalcy has been sort of the big bugaboo that I've always been chasing throughout my life. That, I was maybe the only Chinese kid in our school system. I think there are two others, and all my high school, Wheat Ridge High School. Go Farmers. And
the Farmers! Wow.
Yes,
should have been my high school mascot, truly. The Cougars doesn't make sense, but the Farmers really does.
Farmers, and we had this big mural that said outstanding in their fields. Get it? No, I mean, this really is. Anyway, but we, all my schoolmates were like the sons and daughters of the Coors family.
Yeah.
And the sons and daughters of, the Denver Broncos offensive linemen, the white ones. So It was a very white, almost exclusively white high school. And I grew up wanting to be white, so desperately wanting to be white. And the media we consume, right? I wanted to be Luke Skywalker. I wanted to be Indiana Jones. I did not want to be Short Round. And whenever those characters would come up in our cinema, like Short Round or Long Duck Dong or whatever, I was that age.
Yeah.
And my friends would, the next day say, hey, do the shorty, do that, do the accent and betray my race for a good laugh. It became very fun. But yeah, and so I really wanted to be white. I really wanted to belong and to be normal. I didn't want to be seen as Asian. I didn't want to be seen as different. You get these cruel reminders sometimes. Certain girlfriends' parents would say, you're not really good enough for our daughter. Can you kind of move on and stuff? And, that's the kind of thing that, you've really very much internalized that in the culture. The way that Asian males especially are portrayed in our cinema, ridiculous, goofy, sexually impotent. Characters. But we do know Kung Fu.
Yeah.
But kind of in a sexless way. Anyway, you internalize that. I did anyway. And I also have some kind of degree of neurodivergence, sort of late diagnosed autism, and I'm very high functioning, but there's always a sense of difference. Always a sense of like, when I watch something like Starman, I'm like, okay, it's not that he's an alien, he's autistic. That's why he doesn't speak and has a weird sense of humor. And he's got, the longest time my wife thought, half of the things that I did were hilarious because I was hilarious instead of just kind of autistic. And it worked out. It worked out great. But that wasn't a joke to me, but I'm glad that I'm getting a good response instead of a weird response. But yeah, so that was sort of the beginnings of this feeling of I would just want to be normal, whatever that means. I want to be common. I want to have this attachment to common people. I'm going to learn English better than you can. I'm going to watch every Police Academy movie on purpose. I'm going to figure out I'm going to memorize Monty Python. I'm going to do all these things that actually make me weirder, but I wanted to belong so badly. And then watching this movie about a writer, and at that point I was kind of this, I was writing a lot, and I kind of thought maybe I wanted to be a writer or a critic. And it really kind of, like, that's me. That I'm obviously different. You look at me different and strange, and people will see that. People talk about me kind of the same way. Like, he's really smart. He's unusually smart. He's got unusual, weird ideas. He's weirdly funny, And for Barton is just Barton. Like, wait a minute. I kind of like to live the good life out here. I kind of like to make a couple $1,000s a week. I kind of like to just write about common people. And his first assignment, I think, is writing a wrestling movie for Wallace Beery or something. And and I think he says, the producer that brings him out says, you're a writer. You make us laugh. You make us cry. Kind of like a performing monkey or something. And a little bit, it was beginning to feel like that too, as I was beginning to pitch, beginning to try to get into this sort of profession. The profession, Jordan, where you're like pitching. This garbage, I'm trying to write for Pet Fancy or something. And here's a poem about cat. So you're like trying to figure out where your niche is, and you're trying to figure out what is the magic sauce to get me through this door so that I can become, 75-cent word writer for you at some point.
Yeah.
Back in the day, right? Back in the day.
Yeah, the halcyon days.
Oh man, you could make a living doing this at some point, at one point in our history. But it's, I just. He spoke to me, he spoke to me, and how obviously he stood out, and how desperately he didn't want to, and how obviously he was being exploited, and how obviously he would not be able to fit into the profession that he most desperately wanted to fit into, and how empty all of the praise was that he got and received when he ultimately was outside of this process, and also the difficulty of writing. It really kind of got the pain of that. I think it was with that Thomas Mann quote that writer is someone for whom writing is very difficult. It's like,
which is that appears absolutely in Barton Fink in a very literal way, where you have the character who is his hero. You are one of our great living novelists, and he turns out to be an absolute drunkard jackass. Who abuses the secretary, who is Judy also Davis. His lover, and who also, we come to find, is the one who has been writing his books lately because he can't put pen to paper anymore. And he's the one. He is the one, the drunkard, who considers writing to be easy. And he gets into a dispute with Barton about Barton. Yep. Barton kind of lays it on him that, like, no, this is like agony, this is pain. And meanwhile, his hero is like, oh no, I always find it pretty easy. And then we find out later he's not even the one doing the work.
Don't you find it so, Barton? Ain't writing peace
Well, actually, no, Bill. No, I've always found that writing comes from a great inner pain. Maybe it's a pain that comes from a realization that one must do something for one's fellow man to help somehow ease his suffering. Maybe it's personal pain. At any rate, I don't believe good work is possible without it.
Well, me, I just enjoy making things up.
It's meant to be Faulkner, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's sort of the stand-in for William Faulkner and his time in Hollywood and his descent into alcoholism and all of that, and you know, played by the great John Mahoney, and then Judy Davis, extraordinary Judy Davis, who I have been in love with completely since, you know, my brilliant career and so on. But yeah, you know, it's and it was very quickly this film becomes a nightmare, right?
Yeah.
He's in sort of this analog for hell. The hotel becomes hell. His next door neighbor, played by John Goodman, is Charlie Munt.
Incredible.
And yeah, incredible. It turns out to be some sort of like analog for the id, or analog for unexpressible or unexpressed desires.
Oh, my folks live in Brooklyn with my uncle.
Mine have passed on. Yeah, it's just the three of us now. What's that expression? Me, myself, and I.
Sure. That's tough. But in a sense, we're all alone in the world, aren't we, Charlie? I'm often surrounded by family and friends, but...
You're no stranger to loneliness, then. I guess I got no beef, especially where the dames are concerned. My line of work, I got opportunities galore, always on the wing, you know what I'm saying. I can tell you stories to curl your hair, but it looks like you've already heard them. That's me in Kansas City plying my trade. I was taken by one of my policyholders. They're more than just customers to me, Barton. They really appreciate what I have to offer them. You see, her hubby was out of town at the time, and they were carrying Fire and Life. The third quarter payment was way past due.
You know, in a way, I envy you, Charlie. Your daily routine. You know what's expected. You know the drill.
You know, there's a while I wrote one of my first pieces that I submitted to Film Comment was this really long comparison between this film and Seven, which I'd seen sort of kind of closely around the same period of time. Because there's a moment in Barton Fink where he looks up at the ceiling while he's trying to sleep in his terrible room, and there's a watermark on the ceiling that looks like a 7. And for me, I was like, wait a minute, is that an accident or is that actually a call out that, you know, this movie is dealing with the 7 deadly sins? And if so, does it have any kind of analog to the Fincher film? And you know, I did it and I wrote it, and it was like 12 pages long, and I pitched it to Film Comment, and I got this really serious response back that says, who would possibly care about this? So yes, that was one of my, that wasn't the meanest rejection I'd gotten, but it was a good one. But it really caused me to sort of reassess, like, people aren't really interested, I thought at the time, and they still aren't actually, in really kind of autobiographical, sort of naked, narcissistic, some would say, writing about film, saying this is my experience of it. This is where I approach it. And honestly, it's not the kind of stuff I like to read either. I'm surprised I have any kind of audience at all. But it seems to be the only way that I can ever approach film or touch film in a way to say, I'm going to trust that my personal is actually public, is actually universal, that my experience with film will touch enough people, will be recognizable to enough people to be worthwhile, you know, to invest in, you know, sort of reading. But for the most part, really, I just sort of do it because I'm sad a lot, and I have a lot of time where I think dark thoughts or long thoughts. I have a lot of long thoughts, and I always did. You know, I think I suffer from depression since I was really younger. I had suicide attempts when I was 16. You know, all this stuff in my background, and film actually has been consistently saving my life in a way, has consistently been my confessor, has been the thing that has recognized me, has made me feel seen, when nothing else in my life at that moment felt like that, could see me that same way. So I owe everything, I think, to art. Great poetry does that as well. John Keats especially makes me feel seen, because I'm a mopey, diaper boy. I don't know. But but movies have always sort of made me feel seen in a certain way. And I always felt like if I could express why I felt seen by that, I would know myself a little bit better. And in the process of it, I found some editors who are empathetic with that perspective and that thing. And I have like a little, what not many people, but I have to call a career as a result of that, which is nice. It's really, I feel very, very grateful that people are sometimes like yourself generously seek me out sometimes to talk about this process of writing for me, which has always been confessional and transparent. I don't really have a lot of necessary survival instincts when it comes to writing about what I should write about or what I shouldn't write about. For me, there's only one way ever to approach art is with my full heart. And so I do that sometimes at some personal cost.
Sure,
but the personal benefit is always more than that.
Well, to get ready to talk with you, I read every review of a Coen Brothers movie published on Film Freak Central by you. And I think, hearing you talk about the way, talking about your connection to film and the sort of life-saving quality of it, I wrote down some quotes from you, and I'm not going to read your work back to you as like a process of this conversation, but I do think it is interesting. And with it comes up a couple of times throughout the course of your reviews, and specifically in the Hail Caesar one, there's a moment where you say that the Coens imply that God is the movies, divinity is the flicker of image on screen. I like this idea. And then you kind of go on to elaborate on that and say that I believe that watching film closely approximates the physiological conditions under which man first learned about his culture and his place in it. The moment of mythology, humanism, self-awareness. That's God, you see. At least it has been for me in those dark, cavernous tabernacles, the movie houses of my baptismal youth, but awareness comes at a cost. And the reason I bring that up here is because as something that feels so deeply in you, and to read that into Hail Caesar and to connect so strongly with Barton Fink in this conversation, I wanted to hear from you about broadly the perhaps kinship between you and the Coens themselves in recurrent aspects of their work, to where you have been reviewing and ingesting this cinema long enough to feel an identification with that. I feel that there is a moment in this film that conveys the kinship between God and cinema. And so I wanted to hear about them as filmmakers with a body of work that is speaking to you at that kind of intimate level.
Well, I think it's interesting about the Coens is that they're very good literary critics. They've, just like Quentin Tarantino, I think is a very good cinema critic, not a good writer about cinema, because I didn't love his book so much, but, all of his insecurities, and I think his youth being bullied comes through in his writing, unfortunately. It's overly defensive, but his movies really understand the movies that he's borrowing from.
Right. He is the great pastiche artist. And he's one of my favorite filmmakers for that reason.
Absolutely agree. And I think the Coens are the same with literature, with adaptation. They really understand even genre. Like when they make No Country for Old Men, it isn't just an adaptation of that one Cormac McCarthy. It's an adaptation of all of Cormac McCarthy. They kind of understand it. Or Their True Grit is an adaptation of all of Charles Portis's work, and not just Charles Portis. And Brothers, the finest adaptation of the Odyssey. I don't care what Christopher Nolan did that there ever could be, because they really understand what the Odyssey was about. This collection of regional songs and folktales, and sort of this exploration of a regional culture. That's what the Odyssey is. It's a long poem comprised of songs. And so I love the Coens for that they truly understand the source material. They understand the reason that we tell stories and the reason that we have to make sense of the world somehow. We have to make sense of one another, our place in the world, our relationship with each other in the world. I think that's why they're not so effective individually as filmmakers, or haven't been for me anyway, is that they've lost sort of that conversation with one another, in which they were actually, the movies become interrogations of one another. And as brothers, there's this really interesting, essentially existential conversation that's happening here about their sources and where they're from and what's moved them to this point. And I think that comes through in their best films, and even their less loved films like Intolerable Cruelty or whatever, or even the remake of Lady Killers. Yeah, which I think is largely unsuccessful because they don't really understand movies that well, but they really, really understand literature. And their movies, when they're at their most literary, like Barton Fink, for instance, in Miller's Crossing, absolute masterpieces, understand something about relationships and identity, especially in they're lacerating about it. They're uncompromised. They're sort of like Charlie Kaufman in that way, where they Barton Fink is not a hero. Barton Fink is a giant loser who's
and he's
deluded.
often an asshole. One of my favorite moments in the movie is when, because he's these obsessive rants about the common man and the stories that everybody has to tell, and it's not about the people with the big checkbooks. It's about the people living in the gutters in the streets who have these experience. And he's telling this to John Goodman, who he thinks is an insurance salesman at this point. Couldn't be a more common man than a door-to-door insurance salesman. And every time he starts to try to tell a story, Barton cuts him off.
There's a few people in New York, hopefully our numbers are growing, who feel we have an opportunity now to forge something real out of everyday experience. Create a theater for the masses based on a few simple truths, not on some sharp-worn abstractions about drama that don't hold true today if they ever did. I don't guess this means much to you.
Hell yeah, I could tell you some stories.
And that's the point, that we all have stories. The hopes and dreams of the common man are as noble as those of any king. The stuff of life, why shouldn't it be the stuff of theater? And God damn it, why should that be such a hard pill to swallow? Don't call it new theater, Charlie. Call it real theater. Call it our theater.
I can see you feel pretty strongly about it.
And then it builds up to that amazing moment when who revealed to be a serial killer, John Goodman's character, screams at him. It's like when Barton asks, like, why me? Why have you put me in this position? Like, there's a dead woman. It's gone all to hell, a catastrophe. And John Goodman screams at him, because you don't listen. And it's so vindicating in that moment when you hear this bastard, in some ways, get sort of taken off his pedestal for all of his highfalutin speak about the common man, to be like, but you don't fucking listen to the common man when he tells you something.
He's so pretentious.
So pretentious.
He is, just by using the term common man, saying that you have the common touch. Who the hell are you, buddy? And I am racked with self-doubt. I'm racked with crises of confidence. I'm racked with self-loathing, usually. And again, that's why I feel seen by Barton Fink so much, is that he's clearly gifted, right? He's clearly talented enough. People think so and whatever. And but I don't know, are those people patronizing him? I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, his desire to be like among the common demonstrates his awareness that he's different, or demonstrates his belief that he's elevated in some way. And he'd like to not be seen as, what does he say about his opening night reviews? It's like, well, you can use it to wrap fish tomorrow, so it's not a total.
What did the Herald say?
I happen to have it with me.
Please, Derek.
Bear Ruined Choirs, Triumph of the Common Man. The star of Bear Ruined Choirs was nowhere to be seen on the stage of the Belasco last night, though the thespians involved all acquitted themselves admirably. The find of the evening was the author of this drama about simple folk, fishmongers, in fact, whose brute struggle for existence cannot quite quell their longing for something higher. The playwright finds nobility in the most squalid corners and poetry in the most callous speech. A tough new voice in the American theater has arrived, and the owner of that voice is named Barton Fink.
Well, they'll be wrapping fish in it in the morning, so I guess it's not a total waste.
Sinning.
But he lives and dies for that, and how much of that is me being sort of flayed naked in front of people, to say I'm like Barton Fink, where I'm like, oh, who cares about all the praise and all the people and all the stuff that I get published and stuff? It's like, I do. I do a lot. But then I feel loathing about it. Like, why do I care about this? Why does this matter? And, the morning after I was first published in the New York Times, I was like, everything surely must be different now. I'll wake up a different person. I didn't. Still same thing, still same issues, still same whatever. I did hear from an uncle that I didn't hear from for like 20 years, who said, "Hey, how long have you been a film critic?" Like, my whole life. Absent family member. But yeah, it's I think the Coens do get this, and there's so much fault and imperfection about their characters. I mean, maybe Marge Gunderson is the only perfect character in their filmography, but there's so much like, boy, this is not a good person, or this is a very deeply flawed person. I like the Japanese guy in Fargo. I feel like that guy, the guy who pretends that he's married somebody and she's died or something, and tries to hit on Marge and he's crying and stuff. Like, that's me. Creating a fake life, creating an elevated sense of myself through my accomplishments, elevated, versions of my accomplishments.
I shouldn't have done this. I should. I thought we'd have a really terrific time.
It's okay, Mike.
You were such a super lady. And then I've been so lonely.
It's okay, Mike.
All that eventually falls away from me over time.
Mm-hmm.
But the Coens have always made me feel kind of vulnerable in that they're able to get down to it, to tell these stories, to tell these mythologies about us and everything, and to ultimately say, for them, and Hail Caesar movies were also means for them to begin to express themselves truly.
Mm-hmm.
Like whatever conversations we have with each other in real life and everything, through art, through my writing, if you would call it whatever, but is when I'm actually honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm actually unable to lie to you, is to say, yeah, this is I'm broken in several different places, and let's begin here.
It's time for a break, but I'll be back with more from Walter Chaw. And then at the end, I will have one quick thing before I go about, let's call her friend of the show, June Squibb, and some very exciting casting news that we got from her just as we were about to go on air. So stick around at the end for a little tribute to the upcoming work of June Squibb.
Greatest Trek is the hit podcast about new Star Trek shows, and right now we're talking about all things Starfleet Academy.
Starfleet Academy is a Star Trek show made for everyone, from lifetime Star Trek nerds to folks who only like My So-Called Life in Dawson's Creek.
We even had a special writer and actor guest for the 5th episode this season, the hilarious Tawny Newsome.
Look, there's always something fun on the Greatest Trek feed, because when the season's over, we're going back to watching the original series.
And hey, if you like old Star Trek, The Greatest Generation just had its 10th anniversary.
That's Greatest Trek for new Star Trek, and Greatest Generation for the Star Trek you grew up on.
Both shows you can find on MaximumFun.org.
Ready, go.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
We got this.
With Mark and Hal?
Oh, you knew this one.
You can't put that out as an ad.
We just did. New episodes every week on MaximumFun.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Now it's Hewn in Rock.
Hewn in rock?
Yeah.
How do you hew something in rock?
With a chisel.
There's only one Hugh in rock, and it's Huey Lewis.
And the news is We Got This with Mark and Hal is available every week on MaximumFun.org.
I walked right into that.
Again, like reading through your reviews of things, and something that felt like it could have been applied like completely to watching Barton Fink was reading you writing about Buster Scruggs and the short segment Meal Ticket within it, the impresario and the artist, and the relationship between the people with the money and the people who do the writing. And I wanted to hear from you as somebody who the career that this is so much like hustle and self-publishing and like some form of self-promotion, and like you said, like reaching out to fucking Cat Fancy to try and like get a byline to establish who you are. And you have here in Barton, he is just in this doom loop of being unable to write. And he has a producer and a studio head like breathing down his neck in different ways. And when he finally is able to sort of crack the code, and he is just writing tirelessly, he's putting earplugs in his ears during the day so he can just be engulfed in the story. And he calls his agent to say, like, I think this is the biggest thing I've ever done. And it's a B picture, it's a pulpy B picture when he takes it to the studio head. The only time the studio head is finally a real asshole to him is when he's like, what the fuck is this? Like, he brings this, like, this is the greatest thing I've possibly ever done. And he's like, do you understand this, goddammit? Where's the wrestling? This is a story about a wrestler. Where is the wrestling? And he just gets on it. And then I read your review of Buster Scruggs. And there's this part where you say, the world is unkind to artists. The world is hungry for stupid things. It will eat itself. And I wanted to hear from you about a writer, about a writer like Barton Fink just embodying this thing that you have observed in another Coen Brothers film as well. And just speaking to that, like, you send 12 fucking pages of film comment and they're like, what the hell is this? and yet you must persist in the writing, like you said, that for you it like sort of begins with the personal and it can't really begin anywhere else.
I was up for a couple of jobs with major dailies back in the day, 20 years ago. So, when
those existed.
When there was a job to be had. But at one of my final interviews with a local daily was with their new editor-in-chief. And the last question was, we're looking for a movie reviewer, not a film critic. Do you know what the difference is?
Okay.
And I said, I do. And I know that I'm not right for what you're looking for. Because I was arrogant and I was not so desperately poor that I would have taken the job anyway. Like today, hey, if you're still out there, I'm ready. No, but I said, but I said that in my arrogance and my Barton Finkness, right? Rather than try to play along and try to modify my writing and not to think so highly of myself. But there was that time when still I think I felt like, this is sacred what we do. It's sacred that write film criticism. People will say, oh, everybody writes film. No, not everybody can.
No. A lot of people can review a movie and not many people can write film criticism.
That's exactly right. Everyone can do a consumer report. Very few people can build a Chevy. So at the end of the day, what we're looking at was that distinction for me. It was like, I'm unpublishable 90% of publications. And that doesn't mean the 10% that do are better. It just means that they have less discretion, I guess, or less need to make dollars from their usual pieces. That's closer to the truth. My editor that I work with now, Bill Chambers at Film Freak Central, he established the site. We don't have any kind of ads or anything. He's been running the site by himself forever. He has his own separate source of income. I've always, until very recently, had my other sources of income. We both kind of did this because we didn't need to curry favor with Lucasfilm. Essentially, he dropped me from their list.
Yeah, it's not Ain't It Cool News.
Exactly. We didn't have any kind of income from studios. We didn't have any. It's like we didn't take super PAC money. We were, we were Mamdani before it was cool, I guess, in the film critic circles. But ultimately, we kind of, early days, I think we were kind of jerks. We were just sort of like trying to make a splash and be funny and everything. And at some point, I realized that real people were reading this, including people that were responsible for the film and everything. And I began to be much more ethical about the way that I was writing. But anyway, I think what I was talking about is this idea that you make a masterpiece, you make a really beautiful movie, and likely no one will see it. And you'll be appreciated in 20 or 30 years, but you'll either be dead then or your career will be over. And nothing will have, benefited you from that, except that you added to the pool of beauty and knowledge in the world. And is that enough? And ultimately, our culture doesn't value those things. Not the same way as the French or whoever, right? Our culture doesn't value the Irish who actually give you a tax break if you're a poet. But in the United States, it's like if you're not writing, or now it's like YouTube or TikTok, if you're not TikToking immediately about the Melania documentary or something, you miss out on the sponsorships and the clicks and the eyeballs. They're not looking for content; it's sort of looking for provocation and stimulation, cheap shot and whatever. And you can play that game for a while, but ultimately you realize you're not contributing anything to your culture. Maybe adding to its downfall. You're contributing to it, and I think partly what the Coens did in Buster Scruggs especially was begin to talk about a little bit. Oddly enough, Spielberg I think did this with his that giant movie that he did, the virtual reality movie, Ready Player One.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, begin to self-comment on your medium, and you say, well, these are the things that are beautiful that we're throwing into the river. These are the things that are, and it's like, for a streaming site to throw something into a stream is interesting to me. But there's this moment, I think, with the Coens especially, where they have realized that what they do is adored by a very small percentage of people. And the big splashes, the stuff that makes money, what did Oscar Wilde say? He said, everything popular is wrong. I think I think we're in this rinse now where it doesn't really matter what the quality of is something. Like in Idiocracy, right? The best picture winner is a movie called Ass.
Yeah.
And it's just a picture of a butt, right? For 2 hours. So I'm like, we're not that far from that in a way. And the unearned sentimentality, the unearned uh, uh, faux progressiveness, I would say, that, stuff that we've talked about on Pop Culture Happy Hour a lot, which is why I love being on there with you. You get it, is that there's a certain point where representation just for the sake of it is actually just a different kind of tokenism.
Yeah.
And until we get actual representation behind the screens, we get vulnerable groups represented at the boardroom, nothing will ever really change. It's always going to be the same sort of tone deafness or misunderstanding or whatever. Even that term, I don't think we can use anymore. And we have to be very careful. We should be sensitive to these ideas. But are we having the right conversations? Well, clearly not. I mean, we have the biggest cache of evidence of wrongdoing by powerful men in the world, and no more prosecutions. We're kind of done talking about it. So there's a real kind of discontinuity, I think, that between justice and offense, and I think writers and artists feel that a lot and feel it deeply. And film is a medium through which artists express themselves, obviously, but in which I think we can mark that discongruity between what the product is and what the reception to it is, and what is marketable and what isn't. Like, I always bemoaned, like, man, I don't know, I don't love myself or whatever, but I do think I'm a better writer than this person who happens to have one of the 50 jobs that are left doing what I wanted. What do I have to do to water myself down enough to be acceptable to enough people to get this job? Now I have to start using certain words. I have to stop referencing certain things. I have to stop talking about myself. All of them impossible for me. So at what point, do I say, okay, that's just a job that I'll never have? But if I wrote, like a consumer report about something, that level of 8th grade sort of, I was told to write at an 8th grade level for certain publications. If I did that for my whole life, then I could have a career doing this. But then what would I get out of it?
Yeah.
Just this feeling of like real shame and real loss. And I don't want to be known for it, I guess, ultimately, what it was. And so, yeah, I don't even remember your question, Jordan.
No, but you in saying that, like, I feel incredibly seen by what you have just said, because I too, like, I absolutely am not in a good financial position. I wish I had one of those 50 available jobs. It is a struggle. I battle sort of the sense of like shame of not being able to provide for myself enough in the way that I want to. I'm at my big age of 40 years old. Like, that's something that I deal with a lot, but I found like, I've always found that like in my career, it is a consistent sort of, I don't have a problem with authority, but authorities always seem to have a bit of a problem with me. Like, I don't mind having bosses. I don't mind answering to people, but it feels like the people that I have answered to, I don't know, they don't really take kindly to my inability to be anything but myself completely. And I remember a moment, like my very best friend when I lived back in San Francisco, she was the assistant to the editor-in-chief when we worked in a magazine together, and we bumped into that editor-in-chief in the hall, and I started asking him about like a reality TV show that we were watching, and if he thought that sounded interesting. It was Hell on High Heels, when there was briefly a reality show about being an assistant at like Elle magazine, and he was clearly bemused by the conversation, and I think he was enjoying it. But when we walked away from him, my friend, who was his assistant again, was like, I just worry about you so much because you talk to everyone the same way you talk to me, no matter who they are or what they do. And I love that about you, but it makes me so scared for you as somebody who should have so much status and like so much success, but I feel like it's going to be a problem for you. And you know what? Nobody's ever been more right about anything. But I've absolutely never agreed to be any different regardless, knowing the repercussions.
You know what? I've always I tell my students every semester, I say the only thing that you have of value in this world is your voice. As soon as you sell your voice to somebody else, you have nothing. And so it's bad career advice, but I think it's good life advice. The only thing that you have of value, Jordan, is your voice and your personality and who you are. If you ever abridge that, if you find a different code to switch to in order to have some kind of idea of gain or success, that's not even true. It's a lie. You lose everything that's valuable about you. You gain a little bit of money. You sold yourself cheap. And I say, I would have said something differently 20 or 30 years ago. I would have said, hey, money, and status. I've had money and I've had status, and I've had, careers where I've had 200 employees, and I've had all these things, right? I've titled all this stuff. None of it made me happier for a minute. It made me miserable. It made me the person I didn't want to be. When your friend says, you say you don't mind being, boss or whatever. But, the thing about bosses is that there's a certain kind of sociopathy that attends leadership and management. And the higher you get in corporate situation, the higher you climb on the ladder, the more sociopaths are your peers.
Mm-hmm.
And at a certain point, like every CEO is a fucking maniac and not to be trusted. And do you want that? Mm-hmm. Is that actually what success looks like? In a capitalist society, we're told that's success. Mm-hmm. You have to own a house. You have to have a degree. You have to have a certain kind of salary or whatever. None of that is actually happiness. It's just measures of success of capitalism. And every level above the entry level is exploitation of a lower level. So I don't want to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, I tell my kids and my students, I say, you hold on to your voice. That is what you have. If you decide to sell it, that's up to you. Mm-hmm. But the only thing that you have of value, the only thing that's of any value to you in your life and your happiness is your voice, period. Mm-hmm. And I think Barton Fink begins to talk about this a little bit too.
I agree.
As well. That at the end of the day, it's like when he sold his voice, when, he's just left with nothing. Mm-hmm. And he's sitting on a beach, right? And the beautiful bathing girl from the painting, he's maybe lost his mind, says, hey, what's in the box? And he says, I don't know. She says, isn't it yours? And I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's like at the end of the day, it's like, what is in the box? What are all of these metaphors that are being put together about this writer? But then at the end of the day, has sold his voice for nothing. Mm-hmm. For nothing. And that's what lingers with me, I think, with Barton Fink, and why it makes me feel so seen is that, despite my best efforts, I wasn't able to sell my voice. But I tried, man. I tried.
Yeah.
But I wasn't able to. And you know what? Thank God, actually. Because now I'm at a place where I teach at a university. I write special features for physical media. I write books. I get to know my heroes. I get to be on Jordan's show. I get to do stuff that I think somebody who just does it for chicken scratch doesn't get to do. And I think if I had changed in some way in order to make a living salary 20 years ago, I wouldn't have the life that I have now, which is a life that I wouldn't trade mm-hmm. for something else. And I don't live on an island. I don't, that's a coded thing now. I don't live in a mansion. I don't have.
Islands are out. Yeah, Islands are out.
No, never mind the island. I don't even want one. Who said that? I don't drive a Mercedes. I don't whatever. At the end of the day, what I have is a family that loves me. Mm-hmm. I have friends who call me when I'm in the hospital. I have everything that I've ever wanted. And none of it was presented to me as a kid as a measure of success.
Right.
But it's the only thing that's ever made me feel successful or made me feel like valuable or, important in the world, that I've left some kind of wake or footprint. The only thing that's ever done that is because I was true to my voice, whether I was trying to sell it or not. Mm-hmm. I was who I am. I just only am ever who I am. And when you meet me, not to me, it sounds like who I am when you read me. That's just who I am. I can't be somebody else. And boy, some people hate me, but I've never lied to them about who I am first.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so I guess I sadly having to get to like wrap up question because this could just be an infinite conversation where I just keep asking you things. But I guess what I would want to conclude on is saying, like, when you like starting our conversation with the conversation and then getting into the sort of impact of like, cinema being nothing sort of life-saving in the way that you started experiencing it when you were younger with, and connecting so much with the character of Barton Fink. What did it, in the process of like finding your voice as a writer on film, what does seeing a character that you feel so strongly a kinship with, like Barton, and him being a character, otherwise him being a writer himself, what does or did that do for you as someone trying to find your own in terms of seeing that voice sort of embodied in a way you hadn't?
Well, I really think what it did for me explicitly was it gave permission to be flawed, to be not the authority. It gives me permission to be imperfect and maybe inconsistent. Not permission as like, well, I don't have to deal with that. Like, just accept that. I'm all women. I contain multitudes.
Yeah.
And not that. It's like more like, it's a really good question. Was I harder on Barbie than I should have been because I'm a guy? Was it harder on Barbie because I feel like I've been saying this for a long time and I felt like this was obvious and I'm offended? Or was it, what is it exactly going on here? Because certainly it doesn't deserve the same level of whatever that I felt for Hamnet or whatever. Do you know what is it that is happening? And going on this kind of sort of journey, continuing journey of introspection and discovery is what Barton Fink does for me. Is to say like, okay, look, you know, you spend a lot of time being celebrated. You get some good press. There's always more to learn, and there's always more to cop to say, yeah, I see myself as the champion of the common man. First, I call them the common man. Next, I don't even hang out with them. I don't listen to Charlie who's trying to tell stories. You know, have I lost touch with what it is that was always important to me about these things? You know, they're off, and they're people that I really respect. My editor is one of them. First one of them. My wife is another. You, Jordan, where you can tell me stuff. You can tell me stuff, and I'll listen to you. And if you really responded really positively to something that I responded negatively to, I'm going to go look at it again. And you know, one of the hard things about being a critic is that you are immediately on record forever.
Absolutely, yes.
And there are movies that I have given bad reviews to in the past. I look at and I am really embarrassed, and I'm ashamed of it. And you know, one of the key ones is Jennifer's Body. And you know, I think I really was on the bandwagon back then of like making fun of Britney and making fun of Megan Fox.
Most
I was just part of this cultural zeitgeist. I was part of this sort of like, this is fun to make fun of, you know, very vulnerable, beautiful young women and make their success into some kind of a sexual imbroglio, to do the worst of what my instincts were. I just fell into it. And I don't know how to explain that, but I do know that I'm ashamed of it. And I go back and I've since talked to Karen Kusama about it. I've since, you know, programmed the film a few times and flown her out and had her, you know, talk about the film and stuff. Try to make amends. And every time I do it, the introduction is part of me saying, I was wrong about this movie. I was blinded by misogyny. I was blinded by my own upbringing, my own predispositions and predilections and presumptions about young women in this culture. I'm ashamed. And I have to be in recovery about it, but I can't tell you that it wasn't, you know, there. And there's still things that I don't know about. And I still things I have to learn about. You know, there's always room to listen, and which part doesn't. And he's sort of shown it in the worst way. You know, I'll show you the life of the mind. And,
yeah,
you know,
the life of the mind.
I gotta tell you, the life of the mind, there's no roadmap for that territory. And exploring it can be painful. Kind of pain most people don't know anything about. This must be boring you.
Not at all. It's damned interesting.
Yeah.
Right? This idea that you are underestimating others. When people come to me and say, I really love blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, pish posh, youngster. You know, like, slow your horses, Walter, old person. That there's actually wisdom here, and that you're dismissing for no good reason but your arrogance and your fear, perhaps. And so, you know, Barton Fink makes me a little bit less afraid to be wrong and be imperfect about it. And to say that, you know, we take this journey of self-discovery not because we're always succeeding, but because we're more often failing. But it's through the failures and the inconsistencies that I think we become better people, better listeners, perhaps better allies, hopefully in some way. But certainly I feel like, you know, Barton Fink is about imperfection. It's about arrogance and how that leads to essential downfall, that you feel like ultimately you are this great oracle of some perspective. But it's your perspective and it's limited. And what do you cut out when you cut out the experiences of other people?
Thank you. So this was exactly the kind of beautiful conversation that I was so looking forward to having with you, Walter. And I'm so grateful for you taking the time to come talk to me today.
Well, of course I came because I was hoping for the same. So thanks for having me.
Of course.
My favorite podcast partner. Now we get to do one on our own. That's great.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. thank you again to Walter Chaw. That was as illuminating and beautiful and personal a conversation as I hoped I would be able to have with him. In addition to Film Freak Central, you can find links to his books and other work at walterchaw.com, which gives you an excuse, too, to support the MZS Press, the Matt Zoller Sites Press. And now, that one quick thing before I go, just before getting on to record this, word came through the transom that one of our favorite Feeling Seen guests of all time has some very exciting and very Feeling Seen casting news, and that is that the beloved June Squibb will be appearing in the 4th and final season of Yellow Jackets. This feels like a real, I don't know, feels like loops closing, feels like something being tied up that was never needed to be tied up to begin with. I don't know. It feels like a moment for Feeling Seen. That is for sure. And just, we love to see as much June Squibb as we can. She is a treasure. She is hilarious, which you will know from any of the work she's done, as well as if you listened to her on the show talk about how she connected to her character and performance in the movie Nebraska. And I felt super seen by June when she asked if I was good with money, and she said that she is not. Please do. Please do it for June. Go back into the archives and listen to that episode. And since we're talking Yellow Jackets, pop back over, listen to the recent Sophie Nalise episode. We've had the jackets. We've had some of the jackets on the show. It's a point of pride for me. And that's it. That's just a little one quick thing this time. Not to belabor the point, just June Squibb, Yellow Jackets. It's a real Feeling Seen news drop. And that is our show. You can keep up with us wherever you get your podcasts. You should rate us. You should review us. You should follow us wherever you are listening to get every new episode in your feed as it drops. You can follow us like quite literally on social media channels. On Instagram, we are Feeling Seen Pod. On Blue Sky, we are Feeling Seen, and I am Jorcru, Jorcru, which is also what I am on Twitter. Our theme music is by Andrew Epen. Our producer is Marissa Flaxbart. Our senior producers are Kevin Ferguson and Laura Swisher, and this is a production of Maximum Fun.
Maximum Fun,
a worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows, supported directly by you.